What happens when a brilliant attorney faces injustice in the very place she fought to uphold justice? Let's discover the inspiring journey of Maya Harper. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds of Maya Harper's apartment, casting a golden hue over her meticulously organized space. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air as Maya reviewed her to-do list, savoring a rare morning that seemed simple compared to her usual high-stakes routine. At 36 years old, Maya was one of the most respected federal prosecutors in the district, known for her unyielding commitment to justice and her sharp legal mind. But today was meant to be different. For once, her task wasn't prosecuting a criminal or debating complex constitutional issues. Instead, she was heading to municipal court to dispute a parking ticket she believed had been issued unfairly. It was an almost laughable detour in her otherwise demanding career, but Maya had decided to handle it herself rather than delegate it to an assistant. After all, justice, even for minor infractions, mattered. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer and black slacks, Maya pinned back her natural hair, which she had recently embraced after years of conforming to professional expectations. As she glanced at the clock, she felt a rare lightness. The court session wasn't until 9 a.m., and she had plenty of time to navigate the morning traffic. With a banana in hand and her travel mug filled to the brim with freshly brewed coffee, Maya made her way to her car. The sleek black sedan, a recent reward to herself after winning the landmark Rivera human trafficking case, gleamed under the soft morning light. As she pulled out of her apartment complex, the hum of the city greeted her, a reminder of the vibrant, bustling world she had sworn to protect through her work. At 8:15 a.m., just as Maya was cruising down the freeway, the car's Bluetooth announced an incoming call. The display flashed. U.S. Attorney's Office. Maya's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Calls at this hour were rarely casual. "Maya, I'm sorry to bother you so early." Her boss's voice came through, laced with urgency. "We have an issue with the Rivera case. The defense just filed a last-minute motion that could jeopardize our prosecution. We need you to review it immediately." Maya's heart sank. The Rivera case wasn't just another assignment. It was a landmark human trafficking case involving dozens of victims, and Maya had poured her heart into ensuring justice was served. "What's the timeline?" Maya asked, already shifting into problem-solving mode. "We need a response before noon," her boss replied. "I've emailed you the documents." Without hesitation, Maya pulled into the parking lot of a nearby coffee shop. She parked her car, opened her laptop, and connected to her phone's hotspot. The defense's motion was dense and convoluted, clearly designed to buy time or derail the case. As she scanned the pages, her legal instincts kicked in, dissecting each argument and forming counterpoints. Notes filled her screen as the minutes ticked by. By the time she wrapped up her initial analysis, it was 8:50 a.m. Maya quickly called her boss to relay her findings, her voice steady despite the tight timeline. "Thanks, Maya," he said. "We'll finalize the response based on your notes. Great work." Maya glanced at the clock. Her municipal court session was starting in 10 minutes, and the courthouse was still a good 10-minute drive away. Traffic seemed determined to conspire against her as Maya navigated the downtown streets. She checked her watch repeatedly, her normally composed demeanor cracking slightly under the pressure. By the time she arrived at the municipal courthouse, it was 9:10 a.m. Grabbing her neatly prepared documentation, she hurried toward the entrance, hoping to slip in without drawing too much attention. Inside, Judge Harold Kent's courtroom was already in session. Known for his rigid adherence to rules and his brusque manner, Judge Kent was an imposing figure who had presided over municipal cases for decades. His sharp features and cold demeanor projected an air of authority that left little room for leniency. Maya entered quietly, mindful not to disrupt the proceedings. But Judge Kent noticed her immediately. His gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack. "Step forward," he commanded, his voice slicing through the courtroom like a blade. The eyes of every defendant, attorney, and observer turned to Maya. She adjusted her posture, walking calmly to the podium. The courtroom, A mix of people waiting to address parking fines, minor traffic violations, and small claims grew tense under the judge's scrutiny. "You are Maya Harper?" Judge Kent asked, his tone icy. "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice steady but respectful. "You were scheduled for 9 a.m., the judge said, emphasizing the time with a deliberate pause. "It is now 9:10. Do you believe your time is more valuable than the court's time, Miss Harper?" Maya opened her mouth to explain, but was cut off. "This courtroom operates on rules," Judge Kent continued, his voice rising. "Punctuality is not optional. Your tardiness shows a blatant disregard for this court." Maya's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. She noticed the double standard immediately. Just moments ago, she had seen a white man enter late and receive little more than a passing remark from the judge. The contrast was stark, and the message was clear. "Your Honor," Maya began, her tone calm but firm. "I apologize for my delay. I was attending to an urgent matter regarding a federal case." "I am not interested in excuses," Judge Kent interrupted. "This is a court of law, not a coffee shop where you can stroll in at your leisure." The humiliation was palpable. Maya could feel the weight of the room's judgment, the curious stares, and the whispered murmurs. She stood tall, determined not to let the moment define her. Judge Kent reached for his gavel, his expression one of stern finality. "This court finds you in contempt for tardiness and imposes a fine of $500, he announced. The amount was excessive for such a minor infraction, but the judge seemed intent on making an example of her. Maya's heart sank, not because of the fine itself, but because of what it represented: a glaring misuse of authority and a reflection of the systemic biases she had spent her career fighting against. The courtroom remained silent as Maya accepted the ruling without protest. Her mind, however, was already racing. The air in Judge Harold Kent's courtroom felt charged, though the tension was subtle, almost imperceptible. Maya Harper stood at the podium, her expression calm and professional, as if she were merely presenting another federal case. Inside, however, a storm brewed. The $500 fine for her tardiness was steep, not just financially, but symbolically. It wasn't the money, it was what the fine represented. Maya couldn't help but replay the last 10 minutes in her mind. The dismissiveness in Judge Kent's voice, the way he had cut her off, and most notably, the disparity in how he treated her compared to others. Moments earlier, a young white man in a tailored suit had sauntered into the courtroom 15 minutes late. Judge Kent barely raised an eyebrow and simply noted, "Try to be on time next time, Mr. Carlson." The disparity was glaring. Maya had spent her career navigating power dynamics in courtrooms, but today, she was not a prosecutor wielding authority. Today, she was another defendant standing before a judge who seemed more interested in projecting his power than in administering justice fairly. As the next cases were called, Maya stepped aside to observe the courtroom dynamics. She noted everything: the defendant's body language, the judge's tone, and the outcomes of each case. It quickly became clear that Judge Kent's treatment of individuals varied significantly based on race, class, and perceived status. A middle-aged white woman entered the courtroom flustered but apologetic. She had missed her case's start time by 20 minutes. "I'm so sorry, Your Honor," she stammered, holding up a stack of papers as if they were a shield. "There was an accident on the highway." Judge Kent waved a dismissive hand. "That's understandable. Just try to plan better next time. Your case is rescheduled for next week." No fine, no stern lecture, just a reminder to be punctual. Minutes later, a young black man in a hoodie stepped up to the podium. He had arrived 5 minutes late. Judge Kent's demeanor changed instantly. His face hardened, his voice clipped. "Young man, tardiness is unacceptable in this courtroom," the judge intoned. "This isn't a casual gathering. It's a court of law." The young man's attempts to explain his lateness, a bus breakdown, were cut off. He was fined $200 for contempt. Maya's sharp legal mind cataloged every interaction, noting the disparities in treatment. It was a pattern she had seen before, though rarely so blatant. Her heart ached for the defendants who didn't have her resources or legal knowledge to challenge the injustice. The courtroom clerk, a seasoned woman named Nora, glanced at Maya from her desk. Maya caught the faintest flicker of sympathy in her eyes. Sam Peterson, the bailiff, moved quietly through the room, his face betraying no emotion, but his eyes seemed to linger on Maya as if silently acknowledging the injustice she had faced. For Maya, the injustice was personal, but it was also systemic. She couldn't ignore the broader implications of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just about one morning or one judge. It was about a pattern that existed in courtrooms across the country, a pattern she had fought to dismantle in her federal cases. As the morning wore on, Maya felt the weight of her observations. She wasn't just a defendant in a municipal court. She was a witness to a microcosm of systemic bias. Every case called, every ruling handed down, was a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. She had set it to silent after Judge Kent's reprimand, but she knew the messages were likely from her office. The Rivera case loomed large, and the defense's motion needed her attention. Yet here she was, stuck in a courtroom where justice seemed arbitrary at best. She stole a glance at her watch. It was nearing 10:30 a.m., and her name hadn't been called again. Judge Kent seemed content to let her sit, perhaps as a subtle punishment for daring to arrive late. Maya used the time to take more notes, her phone now a tool for quietly documenting her observations. Her mind raced with questions. Should she challenge Judge Kent's bias directly? Would it make a difference? Or would it only confirm whatever assumptions he had already made about her? She decided to wait. Timing was everything in the courtroom, and this situation was no different. Across the courtroom, others began to notice the patterns. The young law student in the back row, who had come to observe proceedings for a school assignment, furiously scribbled notes. She had noticed how Maya, dressed impeccably and speaking with the confidence of a seasoned professional, had been treated with the same disdain as the young man in the hoodie. Nora, the clerk, kept her head down, but Maya saw the discomfort in her expression every time Judge Kent's tone shifted depending on the defendant. Even Sam, the stoic bailiff, seemed tenser than usual, his movements deliberate as if trying to maintain order in a room filled with unspoken tension. The other defendants exchanged looks, some whispering quietly to each other. It was clear that many of them had seen similar patterns in their own experiences with the justice system. Maya's presence, her calm defiance in the face of bias, seemed to embolden them in small ways. Finally, Maya's case was called. She approached the podium again, her documentation in hand. This time, she was ready. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "I'd like to present evidence regarding the parking ticket I'm disputing." Judge Kent leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Proceed." Maya carefully laid out her case, using photographs and city parking regulations to demonstrate the contradictory signage that had led to the ticket. Her argument was concise and well supported, leaving little room for doubt. The judge frowned but seemed to realize he had no choice but to dismiss the ticket. "Very well, Miss Harper," he said, his tone begrudging. "The ticket is dismissed, but let this be a lesson about punctuality in my courtroom." "Your Honor," Maya began, her voice steady but resolute, "I acknowledge the fine, and I am prepared to pay it. However, I feel it necessary to address a larger issue I've observed in this courtroom today." The judge blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "And what issue might that be?" Maya reached into her bag, retrieving a small leather case embossed with the gold seal of the Department of Justice. She opened it slowly, revealing her federal credentials. The courtroom collectively leaned forward, curiosity and surprise rippling through the audience. Even the bailiff, Sam Peterson, raised an eyebrow. "My name is Maya Harper, and I am an assistant United States attorney," she said, her voice unwavering. In my capacity as a federal prosecutor, I've dedicated my career to upholding the law and ensuring that justice is applied equally. This morning, however, I've observed troubling inconsistencies in how cases have been handled in this courtroom. The room fell silent. Judge Kent's face reddened, his stern expression faltering for the first time. Nora, the clerk, paused mid-typing, her fingers hovering over the keys as if waiting for what would come next. Maya continued, her tone calm but forceful. Over the past hour, I've taken detailed notes. Defendants who arrived late to this courtroom have been treated differently based on their race and perceived socioeconomic status. In my case, I was fined $500, the maximum penalty, while others received verbal warnings or reduced fines for similar infractions. The judge leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. Ms. Harper, I suggest you tread carefully. This courtroom operates under my authority, and I will not tolerate baseless accusations. These are not baseless accusations, Your Honor, Maya countered. They are observations supported by clear evidence. I documented each instance, noting the timing, the penalties imposed, and the defendant's demographics. Justice should be blind, but today it seems to have been selective. The gallery stirred, murmurs spreading among the audience. The young law student in the back scribbled furiously in her notebook, her eyes wide with excitement. Sam, the bailiff, shifted his weight, his usual stoic demeanor betraying a flicker of admiration. Judge Kent's composure cracked further. Ms. Harper, he said, his voice rising. This is highly inappropriate. If you have grievances, file them through the proper channels. That's precisely what I intend to do, Maya replied firmly. But first, I believe this moment calls for immediate accountability. I will pay the fine, not because it is just, but because it will serve as documented proof of this courtroom's practices. Additionally, I am formally requesting an independent review of this courtroom's records for the past year to assess whether these patterns extend beyond today. The judge's gavel came down sharply, the sound echoing through the room. Enough! This is my courtroom, and I will not allow it to be turned into a spectacle. Maya stood unmoved, her calm resolve a stark contrast to the judge's growing agitation. Your Honor, this is not about spectacle. It's about ensuring that every individual who steps into this room is treated with fairness and dignity. That is the foundation of our justice system, and when that foundation is compromised, we all suffer. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Nora resumed typing, her fingers moving quickly as she recorded every word. The elderly black man in the front row nodded subtly, his expression a mix of pride and vindication. This was a moment he had waited years to witness. Miss Harper, the judge said, his voice lower but no less tense. If you wish to make a formal complaint, you are welcome to do so, but I will not have you undermining my authority here. With respect, Your Honor, Maya replied, authority is not undermined by accountability. It is strengthened by it. Sam Peterson stepped forward, his voice steady and calm. Your Honor, may I suggest a brief recess? His intervention was tactful, a subtle acknowledgement of the escalating tension. Judge Kent hesitated, then nodded curtly. Very well. This court is in recess for 10 minutes. As the judge retreated to his chambers, the energy in the room shifted. The gallery buzzed with conversation, and several people approached Maya to express their support. The young law student introduced herself nervously, her voice tinged with awe. That was incredible, she said. You just said what so many of us have been thinking. Maya offered a polite smile. Thank you, but this isn't about me. It's about ensuring that the system works for everyone. Sam approached her next, his voice low. You handled that with a lot of grace. Not many people would have had the courage to speak up like that. I appreciate that, Maya said. But courage is only part of it. The real work starts when we turn moments like this into meaningful change. When court resumed, Judge Kent returned, looking noticeably subdued. He cleared his throat and addressed the room. Miss Harper, while I may not agree with your approach, I recognize the seriousness of your concerns. The fine is dismissed, and I will personally review the records you've referenced. Maya inclined her head, acknowledging the gesture without triumph. Thank you, Your Honor. I trust that this review will be thorough and impartial. As the proceedings continued, Maya gathered her belongings, her mind already racing with the next steps. She would draft a detailed report for her office, outlining her observations and proposing systemic changes to prevent similar injustices in the future. Outside the courtroom, the young law student caught up with Maya again. You've inspired me, she said earnestly. I've always wanted to fight for justice, but today I saw what that really looks like. Maya smiled, placing a hand on the student's shoulder. Justice is a collective effort. Keep learning, keep speaking up, and you'll make a difference. As Maya walked to her car, the weight of the morning began to lift. She had come to court expecting a routine matter, but she was leaving with a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for fairness wasn't confined to federal cases or high-profile trials. It was in every courtroom, every interaction, every decision. Maya opened her laptop and began drafting her report, the words flowing with clarity and conviction. This moment, she realized, was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a much larger fight for justice, and she was ready for it. The confrontation in Judge Kent's courtroom reverberated far beyond its walls, like a stone dropped into a still pond. By the time Maya Harper returned to her office at the federal courthouse, the story had already begun to take on a life of its own. A young law student who had witnessed the exchange posted a detailed account on social media, captioning it, "When justice isn't blind, courage speaks loudest." The post garnered hundreds of shares within hours, drawing the attention of lawyers, activists, and community leaders across the city. Maya sat at her desk, reviewing case files for the Carmichael human trafficking prosecution, but her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages and emails poured in, each one carrying a story, a question, or words of support. Many came from lawyers who had faced similar experiences. "I thought I was imagining it," one message read, "but reading about what you stood up for today gives me hope that the system can change." Others came from defendants who had been through Judge Kent's courtroom. "I was fined $1,000 for being 10 minutes late," one message said. "The guy before me got a verbal warning for the same thing. I didn't know who to talk to, so I just paid it and moved on." Even court staff reached out, some anonymously, sharing what they had witnessed over the years. One email stood out. "I've been keeping records of Judge Kent's rulings for years. I never thought anyone would care, but if you want them, they're yours." Maya realized that what had happened in court wasn't just a moment of personal vindication. It was a spark that had ignited a larger conversation. By the next morning, the story had made its way into the local news. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, hoping to catch a statement from Judge Kent, who had retreated into silence. Headlines read, "Federal Prosecutor Challenges Judicial Bias," and "Is Justice Truly Blind? A City Confronts the Question." The coverage spurred a flood of public commentary. Civil rights organizations called for accountability, while prominent attorneys issued statements supporting Maya. Even the mayor weighed in, stating that the city's legal system must uphold the highest standards of fairness and equality. Inside her office, Maya worked tirelessly to organize the growing wave of responses. She enlisted the help of her colleague, Marcus Bell, a fellow prosecutor with a sharp eye for detail. Together, they sorted through emails and messages, cataloging patterns and compiling evidence. "This is bigger than Judge Kent," Marcus said, scanning a spreadsheet. "These stories aren't isolated. They show a systemic problem." Maya nodded. "And it's our responsibility to make sure this momentum leads to change." Meanwhile, Judge Kent found himself at the center of a formal investigation. the Judicial Review Board announced an inquiry into his courtroom practices, fueled by testimonies from attorneys, court clerks, and even defendants. Court records spanning the past 5 years were pulled for analysis, revealing troubling trends. The data was damning. Black and Latino defendants faced higher fines and harsher penalties for minor infractions compared to their white counterparts. Cases involving defendants of color were resolved more quickly, often with less opportunity for explanation or defense. Requests for reduced fines or payment plans were frequently denied, disproportionately affecting low-income individuals. In the courthouse break room, Nora, the court clerk, shared her observations with investigators. "I've been typing up rulings in this courtroom for a decade," she said. "I always thought something felt off, but I didn't know how to prove it. Now I see it wasn't just my imagination." Sam Peterson, the veteran bailiff, also came forward. "I've seen it too," he told the investigators. "It's in the way he talks to people, the assumptions he makes. It's subtle, but it's there." The evidence continued to mount, each piece adding weight to the case against Judge Kent. As public scrutiny intensified, his once unshakable reputation began to crumble. Maya, however, had little time to dwell on the investigation. She was inundated with requests to speak at legal panels, community forums, and even law schools. She declined most, choosing instead to focus on actionable change. "I don't want this to be about me," she told Marcus. "This is about fixing the system." She worked late into the night drafting a comprehensive report, outlining specific recommendations for reform. Her report emphasized that the goal wasn't punishment, but progress. "Bias in the justice system undermines public trust," she wrote. "Addressing it is not just a moral imperative, it's essential to the integrity of our courts." 3 weeks later, Maya was invited to present her findings to the Judicial Review Board. The hearing was held in a packed conference room, with reporters, community leaders, and legal professionals in attendance. Judge Kent sat at the far end of the room, his once confident demeanor replaced by quiet resignation. Maya stood at the podium, her voice clear and steady. "This isn't about one judge or one courtroom," she began. "It's about a system that has allowed biases, whether conscious or unconscious, to persist for far too long. Today, we have an opportunity to address those biases and ensure that justice is truly blind." She outlined the patterns she had observed, the evidence gathered from others, and her proposed solutions. The board listened intently, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. It was a moment of triumph, but Maya knew the work was far from over. The board's decision came swiftly. Judge Kent was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, and an independent review of his rulings was ordered. More importantly, the board adopted several of Maya's recommendations, setting a precedent for courts across the state. The ripple effects continued to spread. Other cities began conducting their own reviews, inspired by the changes happening in Maya's jurisdiction. Legal organizations launched initiatives to support defendants who faced discrimination, and law schools incorporated bias training into their curricula. For Maya, the experience was both exhausting and rewarding. She had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for equity, proving that change was possible even within the rigid structures of the legal system. One evening, as Maya packed up her office, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from the young law student who had shared the initial post about the courtroom confrontation. "Thank you for standing up," the message read. "You've shown me what it means to fight for justice." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. The road ahead was still long, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. As she turned off the lights and closed her office door, she thought about the countless voices that had joined hers in calling for change. Together, they had created something powerful, a ripple effect that would continue to shape the future of justice. The sun filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse conference room as the Judicial Review Board convened to deliver its final findings on Judge Harold Kent's conduct. For weeks, Their investigation had uncovered a troubling pattern of discriminatory practices, one that confirmed Maya Harper's experience was far from an isolated incident. The packed room buzzed with tension as the board chair began to speak. After thorough review, he said, his voice measured and firm, it is clear that Judge Harold Kent's courtroom practices have fallen short of the principles of fairness and equality that are the foundation of our justice system. The decision was swift and unequivocal. Judge Kent would step down immediately. His resignation was framed as voluntary, but the weight of the investigation left little doubt that he had been forced into it. The board's findings weren't just damning for Kent, they sent shockwaves through the city's legal community. For Maya, the announcement was bittersweet. It's not about bringing someone down, she told her colleague Marcus Bell as they walked out of the hearing. It's about building something better. This can't end with one resignation. The board also announced a series of sweeping reforms inspired by Maya's recommendations. These included mandatory bias training. All judges, clerks, bailiffs, and court staff would undergo annual training to address unconscious biases and ensure fair treatment for all individuals in court. Data transparency. Courtrooms across the city would now track fines, sentencing patterns, and demographic data, with monthly audits to identify disparities. Oversight committees. Community members and legal professionals would form independent panels to review judicial conduct and address complaints promptly. Maya felt a sense of accomplishment, but she also understood that true change required persistence. As the reforms rolled out, the atmosphere in the courthouse began to shift. Nora, the court clerk who had come forward during the investigation, noticed immediate differences. It's like people are finally paying attention, she said to Maya one morning. The way we talk to defendants, the way cases are handled, it's not perfect yet, but it feels more deliberate. Sam Peterson, the veteran bailiff, now led training sessions for new court officers. We're the first line of interaction for people coming into court, he told a group of trainees. How we treat them sets the tone. It's our job to uphold dignity and respect for everyone. The Data Transparency Initiative proved particularly impactful. Monthly reports highlighted disparities and prompted swift corrections. Judges were now held accountable not just by their peers, but by the communities they served. For the first time, people felt empowered to challenge unfair treatment without fear of retaliation. Maya's role expanded as the reforms gained momentum. She was invited to join a task force of legal professionals working to implement similar changes statewide. The group included defense attorneys, civil rights advocates, and even retired judges who supported the movement for fairness. One of her collaborators was Sharon Martinez, a prominent civil rights attorney. You've done something incredible here, Maya, Sharon said during their first meeting. This is the kind of work that changes lives, not just for defendants, but for everyone who believes in justice. The task force introduced policies to streamline reporting judicial misconduct, creating an anonymous hotline and an online portal for complaints. They also worked with law schools to incorporate bias training into their curricula, ensuring that the next generation of legal professionals entered the field with greater awareness and accountability. The reforms sparked conversations beyond Maya's city. Legal organizations in neighboring states reached out for guidance on implementing similar measures. Maya was invited to speak at national conferences, where she shared her story and emphasized the importance of collective action. This isn't about one judge or one courtroom, she said during a keynote speech. It's about recognizing the ways bias can infiltrate even the most well-intentioned systems and having the courage to confront it. The movement gained traction, with cities across the country adopting reforms inspired by Maya's efforts. Civil rights groups celebrated the changes, while grassroots organizations worked to ensure the voices of marginalized communities remained central to the process. Back in her office, Maya kept a framed copy of the $500 fine receipt on her desk. It served as a reminder of how one moment could spark something much larger. Beneath it, she displayed a photograph of the task force members, their diverse faces a testament to the power of collaboration. One afternoon, Marcus walked in with a letter. "This one's for you," he said, handing it to Maya with a smile. The letter was from a young law student who had attended one of her talks. "Thank you for showing us that change is possible," it read. "Your work reminds me why I chose this path, to fight for justice, even when it's hard." Maya felt a wave of gratitude as she folded the letter. The road ahead was still long, but moments like this reaffirmed her commitment. Months later, the courthouse unveiled a new sign: Center for Justice and Equality Training. Maya stood in the crowd at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by judges, attorneys, and community leaders. Sam Peterson was among the speakers, and Nora shared a heartfelt account of how the reforms had changed her perspective. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she kept it simple. "Justice is about more than rules and procedures," she said. "It's about treating every person who walks through these doors with dignity. This is just the beginning." As the crowd applauded, Maya glanced at the courthouse steps, where a group of law students had gathered. They reminded her of her younger self, full of hope and determination. She knew the work was far from over, but for the first time she felt confident that the system was moving in the right direction. The ripple effects of Maya's work continued to grow. State legislators passed bills mandating bias training for all public officials, while nonprofit organizations launched initiatives to support individuals navigating the court system. Maya often reflected on how it all began, a routine parking ticket dispute that turned into a turning point for the justice system. She had never intended to become the face of a movement, but she embraced the responsibility with humility and resolve. As Maya walked through the courthouse one afternoon, she passed a defendant exiting the courtroom with a relieved smile. "Thank you," the person said quietly, recognizing her from the news. Maya nodded, her heart swelling with purpose. The legacy of reform was still unfolding, but it was clear that a new chapter had begun. For Maya, it wasn't just about changing the system. It was about inspiring others to believe that change was possible. And for the city, it was a reminder that justice isn't just about the law. It's about people. Amid the professional accolades and systemic reforms, Maya found herself reflecting on her own journey. She had always believed in the power of the law, but the events in Judge Kent's courtroom had reinforced her understanding of its flaws and its potential for good. One evening, as she walked through her neighborhood park, she thought about the people who had supported her along the way. Marcus Bell, her colleague who had stood by her side during the investigation. Nora, whose courage to document biases had strengthened the case against Judge Kent. And even Sam Peterson, whose quiet but steady presence in the courtroom had made her feel less alone on that pivotal day. Maya also thought about the individuals she had encountered during the reforms, the defendants, court staff, and young lawyers who were now part of a growing movement for justice. They were the real heroes, she realized, the ones who proved that change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable when people worked together. Months after the investigation, the courthouse hosted an open house event to celebrate its transformation. Community members, legal professionals, and local leaders gathered to tour the newly designed spaces and learn about the ongoing reforms. Maya stood at the podium during the event, looking out at the crowd. She saw familiar faces: Ava Mitchell, Marcus Bell, Sam Peterson, and new ones, all united by a shared commitment to fairness. "Justice isn't a destination," Maya said as she began her speech. "It's a journey, and that journey requires all of us, judges, lawyers, court staff, and citizens, to hold each other accountable and to strive for a system that treats everyone with dignity." The crowd erupted into applause as Maya stepped down, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. As Maya left the courthouse that evening, she noticed a plaque that had been installed near the entrance. It read, "Justice is not just about the law, it's about the people it serves. Let this courthouse be a place where equality is more than a promise, it is a practice." Beneath the inscription was the date of Maya's confrontation with Judge Kent, a reminder of the day one person's stand had sparked a movement. Maya smiled as she read the words. the legacy of justice was still being written, and she was proud to be part of it. Maya's journey teaches us that change often begins with a single moment of bravery, a decision to speak out against injustice, no matter the personal cost. Her story reminds us that the fight for equality requires persistence, collaboration, and a belief that even the smallest actions can ignite powerful transformations. As we reflect on Maya's legacy, let her courage inspire us to look at the systems in our own lives and question where fairness can be championed. Whether in our communities, workplaces, or personal relationships, the power to create a more just world lies in each of us. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, inspiration, and change. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, we can share stories that spark hope and inspire action. Thank you for being a part of our community. Let's continue building a brighter future, one story at a time.